All right, we're back. Graveyard Shift Movie Podcast, episode number 73. This week, it was my pick, and I picked A Clockwork Orange from 1971. As you'll notice, Maverick is not here. He dipped out of the movie. I don't even know how much he really watched of it, but he was like, I'm not watching this after a while, and he stopped, so he's not here. Also, if anything sounds different, I'm on a backup setup, more computer issues, so I have a makeshift setup going on right here. But it should work fine. I'm not sure how much, like, what the editing tricks are gonna be. I don't have Sony Vegas right now. So unless I get it before I edit this podcast, it might not be, it might just be this. It might just be this video, you know. But anyway, A Clockwork Orange, directed by Stanley Kubrick from 1971. And this is going to be one of them podcasts where I get in trouble because this movie sucked, dude. It wasn't good. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I'm gonna give it a 3.5. And I know this is like blasphemy because it's Kubrick and this is a classic and stuff. But I really, guys, I don't. And maybe it's because I'm a big dummy, and maybe there's a deeper meaning that I'm missing. But I just couldn't. It was just so boring. So I'm sorry if I've let any of you down with my opinion on this movie. But spoiler warning, I'm gonna ruin everything about it, so you've been warned. Before we start breaking down the movie, I just wanted to talk about some things that like it reminded me of, or what I thought was interesting of it. First off, number one is it's almost like this whole movie took place on a different planet. It reminded me a lot of Over the Black Rainbow, or I think is the name of that movie, and Mandy, and the guy who made it. And I have a feeling that probably a big inspiration of his was like this style of movie, because like it just seemed off. The way people talked, the fucking dog sitting down on my headphones. The way people talked, the way like furniture was set up. You know, there's a milk bar. It's very weird. And it all just seemed like it was either this weird dystopia future, or it was a completely different planet from the one we live on. A lot of people in the movie have like purple hair and shit. Dog's coughing. Normally, I would just pause and let this ride out and edit, but I don't know how much I can edit, so I'm just gonna have to go with it. But yeah, like I said, it like the people's hair is purple and stuff, like adults, people who you wouldn't think are having purple hair, you know? But I just found that interesting. It seems so other earthly in this movie. And second, I thought this whole movie was gonna be like the Warriors. Like I thought it was gonna be like gang warfare, because in the beginning of the movie that we'll get into, you know, Alex, the main character, is in his group of guys, and then they run into this dude Billy and his group of guys, and they get into a fight. And so I thought it was going to be a little bit like the Warriors, where there was a bunch of different gangs and they were all fighting and stuff. But that ended up not being the case. I wish it was. But yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about those quick few things. Also, throughout the movie, and Kubrick, this was another thing. This definitely isn't a horror movie. I don't know why. It always gave off the vibe of like this psychological horror, which I guess technically, if you reach far enough, it is. But it's not a horror. It's a straight up drama. Like, Yeah, so we're cheating a little bit with this movie, but how was I supposed to know? It looked like a fucking um, looked like a horror movie to me. And speaking of horror movies, what I was going to talk about before I remembered that is Kubrick obviously directed The Shining, which is often regarded as the best, if not one of the best, horror movies of all time. And throughout the movie, another thing I can commend it on is the soundtrack is amazing. The sounds, the music, it's all great. But throughout the music, and maybe I'm crazy because it's been a while since I've watched The Shining, but I swear they play like the very beginning of that Shining soundtrack, where it's the like the boom, 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 But it doesn't go all the way. It just plays like the very beginning. And I believe The Shining came out after this, right? So I wonder if they took that and they were like, I like that sound. Let's make that into its own little thing. But anyway, now we'll get into the movie. So now it's more of a spoiler warning, guys. The movie opens up with probably the most iconic shot from the movie, which is Alex just staring into the camera. He's got like a fake eyelash underneath his eye. And the camera slowly pans out and we see the rest of his guys sitting with him. There, and what we'll learn is like this milk bar. He's drinking milk. I almost thought like the milk is like drugged. It almost seemed like this. I don't know. The milk stuff was weird. It was almost like the milk was poisoning the youth. Weirdly enough to me. But it pans out and they have their feet propped up on these tables made of like fake women who are naked and stuff. We'll see later that how they get the milk is like from the tits of the fake women and they pour it out and stuff. But yeah, and that it's a super iconic shot. It's really good. And it opens and the music is great at the beginning. The beginning of this movie is really solid with this opening shot. Alex talks about how the milk bar gets them ready for a bit of the ultra violence, as he puts it. There's a lot of old English throughout this movie. A lot of why art thou, and their insults are amazing too. They're like, you jelly spined heathen and stuff. Like it's really weird. But the broken English threw me off. Like you're able to pick up most of what they're saying, but at some points you would just get lost in these monologues and be like, I have no fucking idea what they're talking about. So the guys leave, and we come across this homeless dude who's laying underneath like this overpass, drinking some beer or liquor, singing some show tunes. And Alex talks about how much he hates the homeless and all this shit. And the homeless guy is like, can you spare a pound or whatever their currency is? I don't remember in the movie. And Alex just like takes his cane and puts it on the guy's chest and is like, you're a piece of shit or something. And the homeless guy just goes on a whole rant. He's like, you fucking asshole, and he's like, smite me down then or whatever. And so the guys just jump on, start beating the shit off of him. There's a guy in the gang named Dim, I believe is what they call him. And he's just laughing. He's laughing throughout this whole fucking movie. And he has like a chain and he's whipping them with the chain and they're just beating the shit out of this guy. After that, they leave the homeless guy and we go over to Billy Boy, as they call him, who I mentioned earlier that they get in the scuffle with, who is like in this abandoned theater looking place and he's stripping this girl naked and they're going to rape him. Or as Alex puts it, a little bit of the in, out, and we have this weird thing where Alex and them come out, and this is when I talk about, he's talking about the jelly spine, and insulting them or whatever. And they challenge him to a fight, and the girl runs off naked, and the gang start fighting each other. And this whole time, this classical music is playing in the background, and Alex and them eventually just beat the shit out of these guys, and they run off. and then the cops are coming, and we learn later that they arrest Billy and them the next day. Let me send Maverick a message real fast. He's messaging me. If that didn't get edited out, well, too bad. Anyway, so yeah, they have the fight with Billy Boy, and then they go back to the bar, the milk bar as it is. Or no, I'm sorry, that's later. Next, they get in this fucking, I don't remember the car, but it's like to me it looked like a old drop top Ferrari to me, but it had another name, and they're just racing through the streets. But it's very it's the very old green screen background when people are driving. It's very obvious that it's fake. But they're just laughing, fucking. They're driving people off the road. There's a car they make flip. All this shit. This whole opening section just reminds me of the dream portion of American Psycho, where he's just going crazy and running people off the road and killing people, but it's not real, But eventually they come to this house, and they ring the doorbell, and we get this shot where it's the husband typing at his typewriter, and then it pans over, and you see his wife sitting in this pod shaped whatever. I don't know what it is. Apparently it's a real thing, and it's a famous piece of furniture. But it just added to me this sense of that we're not on Earth. We're in a different planet. But anyway, they ring the doorbell, and the woman's like, "Who could that be at this hour?" And she goes to answer the door. And she's like, "Hello, who is it, And they're like, "Oh, we have an emergency. There was an accident out here. Can you open up the door?" And so she's like, "Oh, my." And she opens up the door, and then they all just come pouring in, and now they're wearing these, masquerade masks, and they just fucking grab her. They come in, they kick the husband. Alex just kicks him straight in the face as soon as he comes in. They're just toppling down, bookshelves and shit. And this is also one of the most famous parts of this movie, because Alex, as he's tying up the woman and tying up the husband and kicking them and shit, the whole time he's singing in the rain, and he's and going along with the beat, he'll kick them twice and shit during it. And yeah, they tie these people up. The wife is wearing this onesie jumpsuit type thing, and Alex comes over and takes scissors and just cuts it out to where she's naked in the middle or whatever, which apparently they did because Kubrick is a known perfectionist, and takes would be crazy. They do so many takes. And apparently the woman was like, "Well, you're gonna find out if I'm a natural redhead today," But yeah, he cuts the jumpsuit open. And then we don't see it, but we pan over to the husband's face as Alex takes off his pants and proceeds to presumably rape the woman. Well, not presumably, he does. He rapes her. And then after that is when we go back to the milk bar. But I did like that addition of showing that Alex and them stopping the one rape from happening isn't because they're good people. They just do what they want. And at that point, they wanted to fight that gang, And then when they feel like doing that, they went and did this home invasion. And then they are just like the gang they just fought. So I thought that was a good addition to show these people aren't, trying to be saviors. They just do what they feel like doing at the moment. Gotta scratch my foot. They go back to the milk bar. This is when we see how they get the milk is from the titties of the furniture. This random girl, who is some TV person, I guess I don't remember what she was. It's been a couple days since I watched this movie, so I don't remember exactly. But she starts singing once again this classical music, and Alex is talking about how it makes him feel like, a thousand suns are shining on his face, and flat and all this shit. And then Dim, the laughing guy, blows a raspberry at her. He's like, and Alex like whips his cane over onto the guy's knee, and he's like, "You will not disrespect the woman when she's singing," uh, and he's always calling him little brother throughout the whole time. And Dim is like, "I'm not your little brother, and I'm glad for that," and like shit talking him or whatever. And he's like, "Me and you are gonna fight." And Alex is like, "All right, bitch, let's go outside and fight," And then very quick after that, Dim is like, "Why don't we just go? We need some time away from each other." And he kind of talks his way out of it. But yeah, and so they all go their separate ways. Alex goes back home, where we see there's a normal ass life. He's at home with his parents. And he goes to school. I think it is like a juvenile school, like he's been getting in trouble, but he has this normal life. But he goes home. He has a drawer full of watches and jewelry and money. And then he has another drawer with a snake. He just pulls it out. And he puts on some classical music. It was Beethoven. And he's listening to it, and once again, he's talking about like everything that he feels, and we get this montage of like a woman being hung, Alex as like a vampire with blood dripping down his chin, and then flashes of like explosions and just all this shit. There's also a point where there's 4 statues of Jesus in his room, and the camera keeps flashing in between them with the music, and it makes them look like it was dancing, and I enjoyed that. But anyway, yeah, and so dude goes to sleep, wakes up the next morning, his mom's like, "You're gonna be late for school, you need to go to school, it's been 4 days since you've been out," or whatever. But dude is like, "Well, I'm feeling a bit under the weather, mother. I must rest, and so I will not miss any more school." That's how he talks the whole time. And so his mom is like, "All right, She goes in and tells her husband that he's not feeling well and shit. The dad is like, "I wonder where he goes to work at night," Anyway, so they leave. Alex eventually gets up. He goes walking down the hall, digging in like his ass and shit. He's wearing tighty whities. And as he walks by, there's this dude sitting on his bed in his parents' room, I believe it was. And he walks by, and then he's like, "Wait a minute!" And he backs up and he looks, and this is I believe like his guide from his correctional school or something. I can't remember the dude's title. But he makes Alex sit down next to him, and he tells him that Billy Boy and his gang were arrested last night, and there was a scuffle, and and all break-in and all this shit. And he's like, "You wouldn't be doing any of that, Alex, right?" And every sentence he finishes, yes, yes. That's how he talks and shit. And eventually, him and Alex are like laying side by side at this point, and the dude like reaches over and like cup slaps him in the dick. And yeah, and he's like, "You stay out of one more slip up, and you're we're done with whatever we're doing," But yeah, and that was I thought this was gonna go like a molestation route, like, and a little bit later on there is kind of a hint at like that, Also, my lip, goddamn, fucking busted ass lips. Who the fuck beat me up? So dude. Oh, also before that scene ends, the counselor dude picks up a glass of water on the nightstand and takes a sip, but it's like dentures from the parents, and it was pretty much easily, Um, so after that, Alex gets dressed and he goes to like this mall area where in the middle there's this record shop. And he tells the guy, "Hey, I bought so and so a couple days ago. Could you go check if it's ready?" And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, sure." And he goes behind. He goes into the back to look for the records. Meanwhile, there's these two chicks sitting there licking dick lollipops, and he's like, "How are you doing, my little sisters?" And like, that's how he's talking and shit. Uh, and eventually, he invites them back to his place, and we get this super sped up scene of them having a three-way, and like they get done and put on their clothes, but then the guy strips them again, and they go and have sex again. Apparently, this whole take lasted 28 minutes, and it was sped up like this, and I couldn't help but wondering like if they were really fucking, because just because of Malcolm McDowell's, it's Malcolm McDowell, right? Malcolm McDowell's history of movies. Yeah, Malcolm McDowell. Because he was obviously in Caligula, which is very famous for its erotic, use of sex, and there's just full on blowjobs, and which, I mean, if it's a movie about Caligula, if you know anything about him, it kind of suits the topic. But I couldn't help but wondering if like if they were doing anything they weren't supposed to be doing. Also, I forgot to mention, shout out Malcolm McDowell. This is his third time on the podcast. Well, I guess technically only his second, because he was in Rob Zombie's Halloween 1 and 2, but that was one episode we did talking about both movies. So I guess technically his second appearance, but his third movie on the channel. But anyway, they have this three-way. They leave. Dude gets dressed in his outfit again, which is it looks like a fencing outfit, and he's got a jock strap looking thing on the front, and he goes to leave, but his other gang members are already waiting like at the ground floor for him, and they're like, "Oh, look who showed up and shit." And he was like, "Oh, I was feeling sick. I've been in bed all day." All that shit. And Dim is laughing at him again. It's like, "You sure you want to feel better back in bed, And Alex goes over and steps over him and just puts his dick right in his face, and then just sits down. And he's like, "Let's get something straight, my little brothers." And he's, talking down to him. But then Georgie, I think his real name is George, but for some reason, I swear they call him Georgie a lot, who's behind Dim, is like, "Hey, no more picking on Dim. That's part of the new way." And Alex is like, "What's this about the new way?" And basically, George is talking about how, basically George is trying to take over. George is trying to be the new leader of their crew of guys. So we go from that scene to a scene of them walking down this like pathway right next to this very shallow looking pond type thing. It almost looks like the reflection pond in Washington D.C. of like the where the monument is, where it shines out. Also, if you've ever been to D.C., don't let the pictures lie to you. The pond and the monument are not next to each other. That pond is way out there, but the way they always shoot it in movies and photos, it looks like they're like side by side. Anyway, a little fun fact for you. So they're walking down this pathway, and Alex is narrating this whole movie as well. He's like, so General George trying to take over for your humble narrator in the gang or whatever. And he's like, "I know exactly what I need to do." And slow-mo, he just swings his cane and hits George in the dick, and then kicks him into like the lake. Dim takes a swing at him with his chain, but misses. And so they're both in the pond, and then fucking Alex's cane, he pulls out a knife behind his back. It's one of those where it has a knife in the handle, and he grabs Dim's hand and then cuts his hand, and Dim has a girl where he's like, looking at his hand and shit. And the whole time classical music is bumping. And then the scene ends and they're at this new bar and he's like, oh good, so we got all that settled, right? And I was like, oh shit. Um, so anyway, Alex is back to being the leader. But he asked George what this plan was that George had in mind, you know? So George tells him about this place where this chick lives. It's full of gold and silver and shit, and she's like a widowy, or not a widowy, a widower, or a divorcee or something. And she's an artist, and she has all this money and shit. So they go to rob this place. They try the same trick again, but the lady is like, I don't feel comfortable opening the door for strangers. She's like, there's a gas station like a mile down the road. You know, you need to go there. And so Alex is like, oh, okay, you know. So he goes to like climb around the building. We cut back inside, and she's on the phone with the police saying that someone came to her door, and it sounded an awful lot like the same thing that the people who then raped and beat that other family from the other night said. So she was able to realize, hey, this guy's saying the same thing that the people said who broke in and beat these people up. This is, you know, I'm not answering the door for this. But as she hangs up with the police, she looks, and the dude has come in from the back door behind her, and he's wearing the mask again. And she's like, how the fuck did you get in here? Next to Alex on the table is this big ceramic statue of a dick. And he keeps playing with it and slapping it and shit. And she's like, leave it alone, you know? I don't really remember what they talk about. But eventually they end up, you know, she's coming at him with a knife, I believe. And he takes the dick and has it. And he's like, ooh, and moving around her and shit. He fucking knocks her down at one point, and the cops are coming. So in his panic, he's like, oh shit. So he takes the dick and just slams it down on her face. And then he goes to leave. Also, I forgot to mention that in the scene, as he enters, he's like, hi, 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 you know? And that was good. And as he's looking around at all the like dick statues, he goes, damn, naughty, naughty, you filthy old sucker. And I was like, oh shit. So yeah, he slams the dick on her face, and he goes to leave because the cops are coming. He goes outside to his gang, and he's like, "We gotta go. The cops are coming." But George is like, "Not so fast," and then takes a milk jug or a glass of milk and slams it against his face, and then the three of them go running off, laughing. Alex is down on the ground. He's like, I can't see. I'm blind, you know. And then the cops pull up and they arrest Alex. My stomach gurgled. They take him to jail. They got him in the station. They want him to talk, but he's not, obviously. But then the counselor dude from the school shows up and is like, oh, this is the end of the line, yes. He tells him that you are now a murderer, Alex. And he's like, no, you kid me, you know? And he goes, no, your victim has died. So the lady that he slammed the dick down on her face died in the hospital. So now Alex is a murderer. Right after this, too, the scene ends with, I believe it was the cop. I don't think it was the counselor dude, but it might have been. But just spitting on Alex's face. Just a straight gob of spit. And I was like, God damn, you know? But Alex gets sentenced to 14 years in jail. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where the movie goes downhill. Because the whole, 15, 20 minutes of the movie, it was so weird. And, it had so much going on still that I was enjoying it. And then after he goes to jail, this movie is just a slog. It has the middle part that we'll get into when they do the experiments that's pretty cool. But it just, after this, it was just so boring. I don't know how Maverick felt about it because, like I said, he dipped out. But yeah, it was just so boring after this. So anyway, he's getting checked in the prison. The guy who's in charge here is like yelling so loud that it's making his microphone break, like the boom mic or whatever they're having him, use. They make Alex strip and bend over, and the guy like gets behind him and looks into his ass with the flashlight and shit. And I was like, oh goddamn. But anyway, they check him in. The Alex starts doing a bunch of church shit. We fast forward 2 years, and we see he's working in the church. And as he's there, there's a guy in the crowd who's looking at him, going like that and stuff. And that's the allude to molestation or whatever that I was talking about. But yeah, I was like, what the fuck is going on over here, you know? Alex is talking to his priest in the library. And he fucking blanking out, sorry. He talks about how there's a new treatment that supposedly gets people out of jail quicker and makes sure they never get back in, and he wants to be a good boy and, you know, all this shit. And the guy's like, it's not tested, you know, and Alex is like, please, sir, I just want to be good, you know, I don't want to keep causing trouble or whatever. And he asked the priest to put him into the new thing. The next day, the Minister of Interior, like, well, I thought it was the mayor, because in the scene before they had talked about the mayor, but this ends up being like the Minister of something. But basically, he's the guy kind of in charge of the new experiments. He comes, and they line up all the prisoners, and he walks down the line, and he's like, look, they like being here. They like the punishment. And Alex comes forward and is like, you're right, sir, you know? And then the minister is like, who said that? And he comes back and asks who Alex is, and they're like, oh, he's in for murder, 14 years and shit. And he's like, oh, he'll be perfect. And so he picks Alex for the new treatment experiment that'll get you out of jail quicker. And yeah, so basically Alex came forward, you know, to get himself recognized to be picked for this thing. There's like a 10 minutes of them checking him into this new area that it didn't need to be. I think I saw like an original cut of this movie was like 4 hours before and it was like, Kubrick, my guy, come on. But they check him into this new place. They give him a shot of some shit in his ass, that they say is for like hydration or whatever. Later on, I kind of thought it was like LSD they were injecting into his ass or something, but I don't know what it was. But anyway, they take him for his first thing of this new treatment, and once again, this is a contender for most famous part of this movie is Alex straight-jacketed to a chair with his eyes clamped open and brainwashed basically by watching these videos of violence and sex and all this stuff. And the whole time a doctor's sitting next to him dripping eye drops into his eye, which I saw was like a real doctor that was like, that was his whole point, was to make sure the guy's eyes stayed wet and didn't dry up. Like, that was real shit. But they show him like rapes and murder and all this shit. And at first he's like smiling as it's happening, and then he's narrating. He's like, I started to notice that I was feeling quite sick as they were doing it. And by the end of it, he's like, you know, and he's hating it. And then we go up, and there's a whole bunch of people there like taking notes and watching this happen. And the main doctor who's in charge of the experiment goes, all right, in the next few minutes, he'll experience a death-like paralysis and an overwhelming sense of dread or something like that. But we don't see it happen. I was looking forward to the death paralysis, but you don't see it. I was like, oh man. Um, Next day, he has to do 2 sessions. He's watching Nazis and shit, and it's all fine. But then he notices that in the background of all this horrific shit, they're playing Beethoven. And this is what finally causes Alex to break. And he lets out a fucking, ah, like just this wild scream. And basically, he's like, I shouldn't be feeling ill while I'm hearing this beautiful music and all this stuff. And the fact that now he's, this music is causing him to feel uh, sick instead of all these feelings he had before in the beginning of the movie is what finally causes him to break. And he's like, I'm cleared, I'm cured. And they're like, not yet, boy, but you will be, a couple more moments. Yeah, they don't let him out. And basically, he's supposed to be there a fortnight, and I presume he was, because then when we go to the next thing, he's about to be released the next day. So we skip ahead until he's ready to be let go. He's on the stage, and there's a bunch of people there, and basically they're there to witness like the outcome of the experiment. And they have this guy come out while Alex is standing on stage and basically like insult him and smack him in the face and shit. And Alex can't do shit because he's getting sick because of the violence and everything. And he's just choking up, and the guy's kicking him in the ribs. I had seen that supposedly Malcolm McDowell did break a rib on this scene. But yeah, and he just can't move. He's just on the ground, like, gagging and shit. And then the guy makes Alex lick the bottom of his boot. And I was like, God damn, And then they're like, all right, you can leave. And you might think that's it, but no, they have one more thing where they bring out this completely naked chick that stands over Alex. And then he, like, goes to touch her, but he can't. He gets sick again. And I was wondering, I was like, does that mean he just can't, like, have sex again? Is he just not capable of being in a relationship? Like, I could get the whole rape thing, but, just not being allowed to touch someone. I was like, oh, alright. But anyway, that proves that he's cured, and they release dude the next day. Alex goes home, but his parents have a new guy living there. I can't remember his name's Joe, sorry. And Joe's living there. Alex comes in and does like a fake punch at his dad, and his dad's like, oh my god, And basically they're just scared of Alex because of what he did. And Joe is insulting him and is like, you left your poor parents and, all this stuff. And Alex goes to punch him, but then gets sick again. And he's like, And so Alex is all sad. He's like, where am I going to stay, And they're like, well, and then he's like, what about his snake? I can't remember his name. But they say the snake had an accident and he died. And I was like, oh, man, the snake's dead. But anyway, so eventually Alex is like, you know what? I'm out of here. Never talk to me again or whatever. And he leaves. We go to a scene of him standing by, like, the ocean and just staring out into the like, horizon. And the homeless guy from earlier shows up and is like, can you spare a pound? And Alex is, like, not listening. And finally the guy's like, can you spare a pound? And Alex is like, oh. And he gives him it. But then the guy's like, thank you. But then he looks at him. And he's like, oh, and he recognizes who it was. He's like, you're that guy. You and your friends jumped me in the, And Alex is like, no. And he goes running off because he's getting sick because the guy's yelling at him. But he runs straight into, like, homeless alley. And the homeless guy's like, that's the guy. And so all the homeless people get up and start jumping Alex. And they're beating the shit out of him until eventually these 2 cops come up and they're like, all right, break it up. And the homeless people get up and leave. And then they lift Alex up, and Alex looks up and he goes, oh no. And it pans up, and the 2 cops are George and Dim. And they're like, look who it is. And immediately Dim is like, you know. They handcuff Alex. They take him into the middle of like this field where they have this bathtub looking thing filled up with just this dirty, murky water. And they dunk his head under, and they're like hitting him with a baton as they're drowning him. And this is all like one take. Shout out Malcolm McDowell for doing this. I think I saw that they had a breathing system down there for him, but he stays down there forever. Just gets the shit kicked out of him. And eventually they pull him back up, and they leave him there all fucked up. It's nighttime now. It's storming and shit, and Alex is all, fucked up, and he's walking, and he comes across he doesn't realize it, but it's the house from earlier that they broke into, and he raped the wife and everything. And he goes up and he rings the doorbell, and we get the same shot again of the husband sitting there like, I wonder who it is. But then it pans over, and instead of the wife, there's this big muscle dude there working out, wearing the shortest little shorts you've ever seen. Like, half his ass is hanging out. It's very weird. But he's like, I don't know, I'll go check. So he goes and opens the door, and right as he opens the door, Alex is like on his knees falling forward. And dude's like, oh, and so he picks up Alex. He carries him into the living room where we see the husband is now in a wheelchair. And he doesn't recognize Alex because, as Alex says as he's narrating, me and my friends were wearing our maskies, so he doesn't. Also, there's a whole thing where, I can't remember who said it, but they talk about how Alex has, like, the mindset of a child or whatever. And he does talk like a child throughout the movie. He's like, eggy weggies and stuff like that, But anyway, the guy's in a wheelchair. He doesn't recognize him. And so he's like, give this person a hot bath, Or Alex is like, oh, the cops took me out here and all this shit. And the husband is like, oh, they do that all the time. And, so they run him a hot bath. As Alex is in the bath, he starts humming, and he's humming the Singing in the Rain. And then he keeps getting louder and louder with Singing in the Rain. Meanwhile, out in the living room, the husband's on the phone with someone, like, talking about how this brainwash thing, and, they can make a weapon, and there's all this shit. That at this point, I was like, I don't care. But anyway, he eventually hangs up, and then he hears Alex singing in the rain, and he, like, wheelchairs over to the door and puts his ear next to it and hears it, and then it comes back, and dude has, like, these PTSD flashbacks and makes the wildest fucking, what is that? Like this and shit. It's the craziest looking thing, and I was like, what the fuck are you doing?
With the rain, I've a smile on my face. I walk down the lane to a happy
Next scene, we go and Alex is in a robe sitting at the dining table eating, like, spaghetti. And the big muscle dude carries the wheelchair guy down the stairs and lets him go. And immediately the wheelchair dude is like, are you enjoying the food? And talking real loud, and he's making him drink wine and all this shit. And I think Alex can tell that something's up, Dude talks about how a couple years ago his house was broken into and he was left a cripple, and his wife died or whatever. It says she was raped, and eventually, like, died of pneumonia, like, a couple months later or something. But the guy's like, I know what really killed her, So the guy invites these people over who are supposed to help out Alex, and they're asking him all these questions and shit. And they're asking him if he wants to die and everything. And Alex is like, well, kind of, And then he says that, he doesn't see very far into the future for himself. And he feels like any second something terrible is going to happen to me. And right after he says it, he just face plants into the spaghetti, and they pick him up and he's asleep. So the wine, I guess, was drugged, He wakes up in the bedroom upstairs. And during that conversation downstairs, he had talked about the brainwashing and how they made Beethoven like it was, it used to be his favorite thing, and now he can't listen to it and everything. So he wakes up, and downstairs they're just blasting Beethoven. And so immediately he's sick, and he's stomping on the floor, and he's like, turn it off, And we go downstairs, and we see the crippled dude sitting there, and he's like looking up at the ceiling, smiling. One guy's just rolling pool balls into like the pocket and stuff. It's a very weird scene. But eventually Alex is like, well, I decided I'd have to do what I've wanted all along, and I'd have to snuff it, So he goes over to the window, opens it up, and jumps out. But I hated the way he jumped out, because he jumped out and did like a swanton bomb when he should have just went head first, because it's not very far, But he jumps out, and of course he wakes up in the hospital with casts on his arms and casts on his legs, and he's all fucked up. I don't know how long he was out and shit. But he wakes up, and he's like, like doing that, and then out from a curtain, the doctor and the nurse cut, and they were fucking, and they're like pulling up their pants, and they're like, are you alright, So, dude wakes up. We get a bunch of flashes of news articles talking about how Alex tried to kill himself, and people are blaming the government and the people who have these treatments on it, and all this shit. And then after that, we get a scene where the psychiatrist comes in to talk to Alex, and Alex tells her that he keeps having these dreams that when he was out, there were doctors poking around in his head and everything. And the woman's like, oh, don't worry about that, And then she pulls out a bunch of diagrams or things where it's like someone will be like, hey, can you hold my eggs? And he's supposed to respond with how he wants to respond. And so basically this whole scene is just to show you that now Alex is able to, when they're like, can you take this banana? And he's like, yeah, if I get to shove it up your ass. And he's like, And so Alex is able to have these violent thoughts again. This one also, I was like, does the nurse have purple hair? And then after watching the back, I think she did have purple hair. So I was like, alright. The minister dude from earlier who picked him out comes in and talks to him. And from what I gathered, he talks about how they arrested the wheelchair guy, and he wanted, use Alex and everything. And he talks about how people aren't going to vote for them next year because of things that happen, but you could change that, and you could, do everything. And as he's doing this, he's like feeding Alex, and Alex keeps on going like opening his mouth to be fed, which I read was improvised by Malcolm McDowell because everyone was getting bored on set as they were filming the scene. And I was like, gee, everyone's getting bored, and you thought this would be good for the fucking movie? Like, what do you... But anyway, they need Alex to stay in office, and they're like, we'll give you any job you want with any salary you want. You tell us what it is, and we'll give it to you, And they bring him in 2 giant-ass speakers where he can listen to Beethoven now. And they bring in the speakers. Him and the minister are shaking hands. They bring in all these paparazzi to shoot photos. And then Alex is smiling, and then his eyes roll up, and we get a flash of all these people standing around watching Alex roll around naked with this woman in the snow. And then the movie ends with Alex going, oh yeah, I was cured, alright. And that's the end of A Clockwork Orange. This movie had a budget of $1.3 million, and it made a box office of $114 million. We already went over that, the 4-hour cut and everything, and all that shit. Let's see if there's anything else I haven't talked about. No, that's about it. Best of, worst of. My best of will be the sped up orgy threesome scene, which I thought was very good. And then worst of is just the movie after the gang stuff when he goes to jail. It was so boring. I didn't like it at all. Also, this movie's based on a novel. I don't remember who wrote it, But yeah, and apparently in the novel, Alex is like 15, and those girls he had the orgy with are like 10 and stuff. So the novel, obviously, the age is a little different, and Kubrick's gonna feel like doing that. But yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, thanks for watching. Monday coming out will be Scream 4, and the next week will finally be on the newest Scream that just came out. Next week, it's supposed to be Maverick's pick, but I don't know if he's going to pick a movie. So next week it might be VHS. Because that's what I was going to have us watch if he doesn't pick one. So next week it might be VHS or Maverick might come in with a pick. But for sure next week, Monday, will be Scream 4. Alright, well thanks for watching this. Like, share, subscribe, all that shit. And I'll see you guys next week. Alright. Bye.